first things first, I would like to thank everybody who's been subscribing. We just hit over 100 subscribers on this channel. I'd like to thank you all for that, and further encourage you to keep doing that, because, you know, the more the merrier when it comes to barbarian hordes. I've got a little something special coming up, the next review that I've been working on for just such an occasion. We'll a bit more on that when that comes out. In any case, right now we are going to be taking a look at a new RPG module that was just released rather recently for the Barbaric system, which as you'll recall if you've been paying attention to the channel, I have reviewed previously. This is from Stellagama Publishing. This one is written by Ivan Cantero Muñoz and is called It Came from the Scriptorium. This is a horror fantasy horror kind of adventure that came out last month around Halloweenish time, and is very good as either a one-shot or as an adventure that you can slot into a previous existing campaign, depending on the setting and tone that you want to go for. It's very much set in a not quite full-on sword and sorcery kind of world. It's, got halflings and such implied in the setting, but it is definitely for that kind of heroic fantasy mold. So, in any case, we've got author Ivan Cantero Muñoz, editor Omar Golan-Jalel, the owner of Stellagama Publishing. He also did the map for this particular adventure, and interior design layout, and cover art, interior art, public domain. Now, that's something that's a bit of a knock on this adventure. The artwork is stuff that, is public domain, and, it all looks very good. It doesn't stand out as being inappropriate for the kind of setting or the tone of the adventure itself, but I will say that, obviously I'm the kind of person who prefers a bit more, authored look, so to speak. In any case, this is a short adventure. It's only like 23 pages, from start to finish, but it does contain some, some very good ideas, and it's particularly an excellent example of how you can adapt an idea from outside of role-playing into something that, works for the tabletop environment. So, starts out with, just some basic background, setting overview of the different, factions or concepts that have been, part of this particular adventure's history. So this adventure takes place in a monastery that is run by the Brotherhood of the Quill, a order of monks originally constituted for the sole purpose to copy text relevant both to church and the kingdoms until the invention of the print. So there are a couple of, I will say this, there are a couple of proofreading issues that weren't covered before publication. It's nothing too bad, but it can throw you off a bit while you're reading it. Just, bear that in mind. Now dedicated to keeping the copies of all texts regarding forbidden dark arts and knowledge, and this mission made it a punitive order where monks are sent after doing anything sinful in the eyes of their religion. Basically, this whole place is a penal colony for monks who did bad things in the eyes of their bosses and need to be shuffled off somewhere where they can't, embarrass themselves any further. Unfortunately, since that's also a place where they keep pagan texts full of black magic, well, it gave somebody some ideas, and now problems are occurring. Also, the monastery was built on top of the bones of Saint Asteria, a giantess who converted to the church and battled during the Crusades. She fell to her wounds, and the whole abbey was built upon her thoracic remains, as was declared holy ground by the High Hierophant. So basically, the first thing you notice when you come over to this place is the building surrounded by a gigantic rib cage, and the hill behind it topped off with a huge giant skull. That already is a pretty evocative image, so kudos on that. There also mention of a plague that occurred there, a plague that was being treated there previously that affected primarily halflings and gnomes, so that explains why there's a whole bunch of undead, very short undead in this adventure, which we'll get to because it's an important little point to bring up there. So yeah, some kind of a terrible parasitic plague that affected them primarily. They were being treated there as pilgrims and hoping that the relics would help them. It didn't work. Also, you have different, mentions of different saints and stuff like that. And the Stormwolf tribe, which is the main source, if you're using this as a one-shot, the main source of background for your PCs, in the sense that there's a tribe of nomadic barbarians who live nearby and who have noticed some really, really nasty stuff happening to the local fauna around the monastery, and it's causing some serious problems for them. So now they've sent people over to try and check out what the hell's happening, hence where the PCs come in. And what's kind of happening here is something called the One Who Dwells in the Void. This is, definitely a Lovecraftian kind of, horror show when it comes to the main villain for this thing. You also have his main minions, though, harassers, which, contrary to typical Lovecraftian fare, these ones are not tentacle monstrosities. Cylindrical, chromed constructs belong to a reality in which magic is scarce and its inhabitants depend on technology. They can shoot laser beams from their red optic lenses and are able to produce diverse melee weapons to act as enforcers for their master's will. So there's a bit of sci-fi being thrown into the mix here as well. So, referees information, basically the entire background, what do the entities that have taken over the monastery want and what they're trying to do. Of course, the map of the abbey itself. Main entrance here, cloister, all these different things. There's also a tower up top, which contains one of the only survivors of this entire massacre. Yeah, found right in the middle of a clearing located near the foot of a mountain, known as Asteria's Rest, of course, where the giantess fell. As PCs approach the abbey, there is a 50% chance that Brother Carolus spots them and starts shouting to call their attention, although the PCs wouldn't be able to understand what he's saying due to the distance and the bad acoustics. And 50% probabilities that one of the trees close to the entrance does uproot and animate while twisting into a vaguely humanoid monstrous entity called a quartering tree that attacks the PCs. And of course, PC monster statistics provided in the respective chapters at the end of the adventure module. So, luckily this adventure module is very short. It's, compact. So, if this thing were bigger, then I would prefer having the NPC statistics, at least for monsters and stuff, to be near their actual entries in the adventure. However, when it's this short, it's really not that much of a problem to flip back and forth. Usually, if you're dealing with larger books, then it's usually a good idea to have your stats both indexed at the back, just all of them together for reference, and also have at least something there in the main page when you encounter them. However, in this case, it's not a problem since the adventure is so short, so it's easy to check things out. So you have the outside areas, the stables, chicken coops, pigsties, and smithy as well, each one with their own encounters. Yes, here, for instance, they had all their animals. Unfortunately, the one who dwells in the void influence, what happens this place is the aberrant amalgamation, which will not attack the PCs unless they try to put the hulk of tissue and organs out of their misery. Yeah, that is just nasty. I do like the fact that this thing, it's a horrible, screaming monstrosity, but it's not going to attack you unless you try to kill it. And you're probably going to want to try and kill it because it's just, pitiable and horrifying. Oh, it's fun. So, let's see. You also have the smithy. There's, one of the fire basically is starting to attack people too, which is nasty. Although it is, the opportunity to build some of the devices. One of the monks here, Brother Polybius, was a bit of a tinkering guy, so he has some alchemical power tools that were used to help the miners here who work nearby in order to do their work better. Unfortunately, they are currently in the hands of a guy named Brother Bernardus, who is one of the survivors and has gone completely batshit insane. And if we look at the stats on those weapons, the alchemical powered chainsaw, technological wonder developed by Brother Polybius to make the life of lumberjacks easier, cumbersome tool does an infernal roar when it's active and consumes an alchemical substance to work, ignores armor, does 5d6 slashing damage upon impact, and on a critical hit, it cuts the victim in half, killing them on the spot. This thing is nasty. Oh, and he's also got alchemical power drill, help for the miners, awful noise, of course. Ooh, 46 piercing damage, instant death on a critical hit. So basically, both these things are just absolutely horrifying. And of course, if you manage to take this guy out, you get to have them. So very, very useful indeed. So that's basically that. Now, in terms of encounters, most of the encounters here are either like the flame sprite that was in the smithy here. Things that are already present. It's like the flame sprite, the aberrant amalgamation, that's always going to be there. Otherwise, there is, in each area, there's a probability of various creatures and things showing up there. There's no unified, random encounter table for the entire thing as you move around there. So it does give, certain areas are the hunting grounds for certain types of creatures who are more likely to find themselves there than others. For instance, the cloister, which is the octagonal space here in the middle here, you have a 25% probability from the second and onward time your players find themselves there. The first time they just pass through without any trouble. 25% probability of stumbling across 1d4 plus 1 hooded marauders. Those are the smaller reanimated gnomes and halflings. 25% probabilities of encountering a harasser, or 50% probabilities of meeting the aforementioned Brother Bernardus. At which point, you know, this thing turns into a slasher flick. You also have various, you know, encounters in the different rooms here. The chapter hall is where this particular ritual that we had mentioned took place. Now, unless you are actually trying to do something with the machine and the portal that's, you know, causing problems there, the one who dwells in the void probably is not going to notice you. This is a larger cosmic entity that has a hard time kind of focusing in on specific people unless they're messing with something that it particularly cares about. If you are interacting with the gate, chances are something really nasty is going to happen, ranging from, you know, temporary confusion effects from getting your brain shocked from the voyage into the infinite, getting absorbed by the gate and ending up in another world for the GM to decide, or just, you know, attracting a 1d4 invisible stalkers that will attack the party and their allies. Not good. Basically, don't mess with this thing unless you know what you're doing with it. Which, unfortunately, the abbot didn't either, so hence the problem in the first place. So I do like the description of this thing. Faint scent of ozone along with the stench of death. Mutilate corpses of monks with blood just partially conceal the arcane signs drawn with chalk on the floor. The walls are also covered in signs of arcane nature, resembling equations, and in the middle of the room stands a metallic contraption which buzzes and hums constantly that reminds of a horseshoe in shape. Arcs of white electrical energy dance from around the machine. While in the center, there's a tear in the fabric of reality leading to a void of absolute darkness. So, yeah. Not exactly the most wholesome of an environment. And, you know, the shape of this thing, you know, metal bars that vibrate and hum, that's going to be very important to remember when we get to something later. Gardens, also hooded marauders, chances are. If, you know, you spend time resting there, they're definitely going to find you. You also have, you know, the various cells of the monks. One thing I like is that if you look at the different NPCs here, you have stats for the NPCs that are still alive, obviously. Brother Bernardus and Brother Carolus, who's currently up in the tower there, having been locked there because he wouldn't go along with the whole ritual. But also for Brother Polybius and Brother Claudius, you get an idea what why they were there, what their personalities were like, and all that stuff, which is kind of important, especially in a fantasy RPG where chances are one of your players is going to have access to, like, speak with dead or some kind of spell that lets them have an idea of what the past was like, you know, one of those kinds of ESP things. So having an idea of what major NPCs were like, even if they're not there on the spot, is kind of handy for those. And also, you have the minions of the void, the hooded marauders, mummified corpses of gnomes and halflings, vicious undead covered in shrouds and stolen monk tunics, armed with sharp claws and needle-like teeth. Although what makes them specifically nasty is the now mutated and also reanimated parasite wriggling within as it can come out of their mouths or even wounds and attack. These things are nasty. They can use their parasite as a telescopic appendage in an 8-meter line for 2d damage. So it's like imagine you're fighting some kind of undead gnome, undead Frodo, and this thing just rips its way out and starts biting at you from across the room. That is, ugh. Not to mention these things can vomit larvae up in a 3-meter long, 5-meter wide cone, a shower of acid. Ugh, gross. Yeah, that's nasty. Meanwhile, their little buddies, the harassers, fly around shooting laser beams. Oh, yeah. Not only do they shoot laser beams, they run on blood. So a critical hit with a melee attack with the harasser latches onto the victim and drains them of their blood, causing instant death. When this adventure says, right here, players should be aware that due to the horror nature of this adventure, that their PC's mortality will be rather high, it ain't kidding. This one is definitely designed for, while it can be slotted into a pre-existing campaign, you're definitely going to want to tone down the lethality a bit. Because holy crap, this thing is nasty. Like, you may actually want to have your players make some backup characters to come in and help deal with that. Because, oh boy, if every critical hit on these things can be really, really painful. That is until you manage to get your hands on those alchemical power tools. Or on a, what was that? Magic item here, the Repentant Resolution. It's a cat o' nine tails, like one of those flagellant things that, you know, some monks would use to self-flagellate. Only this one has been... Yeah. The righteous wrath of Brother Claudius has made an effective weapon against the minions of the void. So it's got some pretty effective abilities, aside from doing, you know, a lot of damage to them, to anything that was created or a servant of the one who dwells in the void. Also able to stun them, which is always handy. And if Repentant Resolution does slay 5 minions of the Void, there's a 50% probability that the spirit of Blood Claudius will manifest as an idealized paladin wearing plate mail and armed with a bastard sword during a difficult encounter. His stats will be the same as a knight, except incorporeal and undead. Which is not bad considering this guy was in a previous life was a pirate of a particular note. And in fact, if you look at his... let's see. Well, Brother Claudius' cell. Where is it? Ah, right here. Haunted by the monk's regret using pagan dark magic, whoever enters and inspects the area must do a check to avoid suffering flagellant wounds on their backs, as well as seeing a vision of what did happen in the cursed night in which the abbot stepped through the portal. Yeah, basically the abbot is possessed by the one who dwells in the void, and his corpse is possessed by it, and if you encounter that thing, your chances are you're going to encounter him, and it's not going to be pleasant. Those who succeed in resisting him may find his account nine-tailed, now blessed with the monk's decision to exercise the evil he helped unleash upon the world. Yeah, and he was a pirate captain in his youth and hid in the maps, a small chest containing 3 maps of different locations where his treasures obtained from his life of plundering can be found. So there is an option to extend this beyond this adventure and have, you know, some ideas of other places to go afterwards. So you have some opportunities to link this to further adventures. You've got, you know, the Scriptorium itself, which is, you know, inhabited by a couple of ghosts. And specifically, I do like the fact that a lot of these enemies, you know, like for instance the Scribe Spectres here, they show up if the players actually walk into this area. However, they will not attack and won't even notice you're there unless you make noise. As you can imagine, they're librarians and they really don't like it when you start disturbing the silence. At which point they start reacting with extreme violence, as, you know, librarians are supposed to. Yeah. And of course the library itself, tall shelves with such disposition, does feel like a labyrinth. You can imagine that. While navigating this area, the PCs must do a check to avoid being tricked by the one who dwells in the void, as it alters space and time to make the library far more immense and labyrinthine than it is. There's always 1d4 harassers wandering there. If the PCs does steal a tome from this place, they can study its passages for 1d8 minus 1 days and learn a spell of the GM's choice. So there are definitely treasures here. There's, you know, relics. There's the, you know, different magical and technological items, of course, that I mentioned earlier. There's some valuables also that can be found here. So it's more than just, you know, stop the evil from destroying the world or whatever. There's, you know, some filthy lucre to be obtained as well if you're, you know where to look. Oh, and I do like this. The dining room and kitchen. All the area has been, you know, the original furniture in this area has been substituted with ones made from the bones of the monks found in the crypt. If a PC died during the exploration of the abbey, their corpse will be found in the kitchen as main ingredient of assorted dishes, from blood pudding to stew, despite none of the one who dwells in the void needs to consume food, nor the entity itself. So, like, they're just gonna make food and meals out of the corpses of your dead PCs, even though they don't actually need to eat. That's a nice little adding insult to injury there. So yeah, so the adventure itself is very well contained. It serves its purpose extremely well. The writing, there are of course those proofreading issues I mentioned previously, but the adventure itself holds up very well. There's no, you know, things that are particularly missing. I will say, other than the fact that I love the fact that during the grand finale it's mentioned that the one who dwells in the void, once it realizes that, okay, gets somewhat annoyed with the meddling barbarians and start rising the different corpses that, you know, from the woods nearby from past battles as void wights, and eventually raising the corpse of the giant saint that the whole place is built on as a skeletal colossus. Which, if we look at Skeletal Colossus, its main attack, Stomp and Slap, automatic death if a 6+ athletics check has failed. Yeah, you try, you know, surviving being stepped on by a giant skeleton, and, you know, see how that works out for you. But this does bring me to one point here. At certain points in the adventure, there is a percentage chance of the one who dwells in the void noticing the characters and, you know, messing with them in some way, shape, or form. But the one is not statted. As you can imagine from a, you know, Lovecraftian entity of cosmic proportions, it simply is, you know, beyond the abilities of any mortal to take on directly. So naturally, no stats. It's mentioned that the only thing, let's see, embodiment of the wish that would make reality go back to its true original state, which is one of absolute darkness and devoid of everything. So not exactly a fun entity to deal with. And it is very malicious and likes to mess with people when they do manage to get its attention. In case a PC does attack this cosmic horror, in fact, is damaging the now hollow husk of once was Abbot Martius, which stats were like those of a sorcerer when he was alive. So you use these stats for sorcerer from the Barbaric main rulebook. A tricky thing to accomplish, as the entity may react to such foolishness by turning the PC's sword into a king cobra or worse. This is a point that I wish that there were more examples of what this thing would, some examples of what this thing can do. Because basically, this is an entity that can alter reality any way, shape, or form it wants within, the area of its influence. So, sure, Abbot Martius's body is vulnerable to, physical attacks. And it's mentioned that if the players do, in fact, damage his body, he's going to start, getting annoyed with them and start, bring the pain. However, it mentions like turning the PC's sword into a king cobra. Okay, that's one thing it can do. How about other things like making the ground turn to mush and have hands, undead hands rise up to try and drag people down, for instance, or cause. Well, there is one particular example. There's a room in this. Let's see, which one was it? Ah, yeah. The parlor, a comfortable and well-furnished area intended for the monks to conduct business with pilgrims. Each round they stay in the stream doesn't make any source of light diminish until it's extinguished, even if it is magical. If it is day instead, the effect is similar with a total eclipse taking place outside. If the PCs try to bring any light into the chamber once it becomes pitch black, the furniture is shifted into living creatures from other dimensions, twisted to resemble a chair, table, etc. The creatures are in agony at first, but then start laughing out hysterically like maniacs in their gurgling, hissing voices. So that is definitely something that, I wish there were more examples of stuff like this that, the one who dwells in the void would be doing. Because when it does show up, things can get very weird very quick. And that makes sense. One, because of the kind of interdimensional aspect of this. But the other one is because of what this thing is whole thing's built on. So you may have noticed, those of you who are horror movie aficionados, little undead guys dressed like monks, silvery chromed, machines flying around, attacking people and sucking out their blood, interdimensional portal that's a big, metal brackets that hum in a, ominous way. Yeah, there's a movie series that this is directly referencing, and that's Don Coscarelli's Phantasm. This whole thing is basically an homage to that film series. You've got, the little dwarves, undead dwarves. You got the sentinels flying around. You have Abbot Martius basically being the tall man. And, that same sense of like reality kind of, slipping around and not being entirely reliable, which is, very much, something that is characteristic of that series. It's always been very dreamlike. I mean, the ending to the first one is apparently the first phantasm turns out to be a dream, but then not at the same time. And the continuity in that series can be a bit weird sometimes. And also, chainsaws do feature quite heavily in that series as well, along with a quad barrel shotgun, which is just beautiful. Frankly, I recommend watching that series. It's really good. But here we get the concept. You're taking an adventure, basing it on something without actually taking the plot or the overall, how should I put this? It takes certain ideas from the setting of that. It takes certain concepts and translates them to a completely different setting and a completely different medium. And it does it very well. If you know the original source material for this, if you know, where this came from, you're familiar with the Phantasm series, you can see the references and you can, understand which, things correspond to what. If you're not familiar, it just seems like this strange, crazy, reality warping horror show. But if you do get those extra references, then it adds an extra little something to it. And that's something I appreciate quite a bit. Overall, this is a very good adventure. Lethal as hell, as you can imagine. I would definitely recommend playing this as a one-shot if you're not prepared to tone down some of the lethality on some of those critical hits, because holy crap, some of these insta-kills are just, pretty common on some of these creatures. Yeah. Upon that first encounter, the quartering tree that I mentioned that's right out front, moves pretty quick, does 3d6 crushing damage. On a hit, there's a 50% probability that will grab a victim and tear them apart. In case of a critical hit, this is automatic. Holy crap, is that lethal? Yeah, definitely be prepared for a high casualty rate for this adventure. There's a lot of chances that things are going to get really, really nasty, especially once the one who dwells in the void gets involved, because it can do pretty much anything. There's literally no limits to what this thing can do other than what the GM is willing to do and what the players are willing to let the GM get away with. Bear in mind, if you're going to be playing with the people you run through this adventure afterwards, yeah, don't be too much of a dick about this. But yeah, this is an adventure that I recommend looking into, and it's only like $3 Canadian. I don't know how much it is in your local currencies, but for $3, yeah, I'd say it's well damn worth looking into. At the very least, it'll give you some ideas for, and let's face it, any kind of adventure that ends possibly with a gigantic, like 10-story tall skeleton just stomping down on your players while they're desperately trying to shut down a dimensional portal to hell that is some, good adventuring right there. So yeah, this has been It Came from the Scriptorium, a barbaric adventure by Ivan Cantero Muñoz, and I recommend looking into it. If only just, to mine for ideas. You can also run this thing, probably adapt to your various OSRs type adventures if you don't want to run it with the barbaric system in mind. Or you can just run it with that and as like a one-shot for in between, main campaign kind of adventures. It's all up to you. So, in any case, I will see you next time. I'm going to be doing another video game review, fully edited video game review coming up next in honor of my 100 plus subscribers. I'm looking forward to this because the last time I did a game review for this series, holy crap, did people like it. So, yeah, that's your only hint to what's coming next. So, until next time, I've been Bastion. Stay savage.